Now, so you're also welcome to week 3 of our short course series. And we always start off with this beautiful graphic that we inherited from Financial Justice Ireland. And I suppose we're inviting you there. A nice activity, Maria, to kind of get us
Mm.
started. Are there particular themes that we've touched on so far that we will continue to touch on that are of interest to you to explore with your students? And I'm going to say students because some of you, of course, are working with your fellow staff and colleagues and wider community, and using this material that we've been developing over the last few weeks with different cohorts. So you're so welcome. So week 3 is our Get Planning week, and we have some lovely speakers for you. And again, lots more rich activities and content. So we're definitely going to be exploring further this question around, your students may be asking you, how can the university support migrant issues, refugee concerns, and queries? So we've got some examples today as well of service learning module assessments and partnership agreements that you might want to use for your modules that you might have going ahead. Yeah. So this week, it's all about designing your service learning projects that might focus on migrant and refugees needs, and in particular, their needs in relation to integration. And exploring the possibilities of the university's service learning pedagogy tool as a way to meet those needs in a meaningful way, right? Maria, we've talked about this as opposed to maybe bringing in guest speakers is a way to build empathy and understanding, maybe a kickstart of a relationship, but moving on from a guest speaker or a one-way relationship in your classroom, more of a two-way exchange and an opportunity for reciprocal and learning and opportunities to work together to build something together. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to come in here, Maria.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important component too of when we're thinking about planning is, how we're going to kind of create these kind of these networks and have a cooperation between universities and all those different entities across civil society. And this is, a component of this intercultural project, but of course, across all types of intercultural projects that we can have. And there's a possibility that, as we develop these types of projects, that there's an opportunity to kind of connect and to share our experiences so that people can learn from as these projects develop, whether that's, in the University of Galway or beyond. So I think there's a really good potential to kind of have a bank of this information that we can, share amongst each other.
Super, like what works really well and what doesn't work.
Absolutely.
I think
Yes,
I've been
absolutely.
honest in sharing that. Oh, I did that activity and it wasn't, landing, you have to buffer it and so on. So speaking of lots of experience and sharing, I suppose what works and doesn't work. Jamie is with us today, and Jamie has a lot of experience in not only teaching service learning modules, but I suppose, Jamie, you've also developed the fantastic digital badge from the National Forum on community-based learning. So you've been supporting your fellow academic colleagues across Ireland to, develop that skill in relation to how to modify a module and develop service learning. So thank you for joining us today. And I suppose my big question for you is maybe advice you have for those that are listening in relation to these community-based learning modules with community. The community piece, maybe having an agreement in place with them and building that in as part of the assessment. Has that something that you've seen that's worked really well for you?
Yeah, thanks, man. Just, I suppose, a small correction there. That digital badge, I was, helped to develop the course, but I wasn't one of the leaders to develop that course. And I had input into it.
Oh, you're too humble, Jamie.
No, it's fine. So, but like I suppose I have experience of developing community engaged learning here in the university and running some programs. Oh, hold on. Sorry, Lorraine, are you talking there?
No, sorry, go for it.
Okay. So yeah, so I suppose I joined the university here 14 years ago, and I would have seen a big pile of reports in the office that I inherited, and I also inherited a module which was around building engineering, and there's loads of reports from the students. And I looked at the reports from the students, they might give me 10 or 12 different technical solutions for a problem, but none of them were in context. And also there's a lot of copy and paste from the internet and so on. So I was like, well, that's not going to be so interesting to read all these reports and to examine the students. So I was like, well, I need to get them doing stuff in action in the community. And so it's through Lorraine McElrath, who was director of the CKI here, that's speaking to her and going to a seminar that Bill Oates did, came across community engaged learning. So we've had about 300 plus projects on community engaged learning around the building engineering. So basically the students go and identify real need of the community. And it cannot be a for-profit organization, it has to be a non-for-profit organization. And then they work with them to decide on what the scope of the project is, what the learning outcomes for the students are going to be as well. And they have I think 2 weeks at the start to complete a learning agreement. So that is where all that upfront thing, it's like a contract between the students and the community partner, effectively, where they agree on what the scope is, how often they're going to meet, what resources the community partner is going to provide, and so on. Because many of our community partners are really, really busy. The reason why they like working with the students is because the students are doing stuff that they haven't got time to do themselves, but that might be useful for them. And in some community partners might have time to support the students. Others will be just, here's what I want, come back to me in 8 weeks with your report afterwards. But it works pretty well. I think there's about 80,000 hours worth of student effort that got in. As a result, the students get credit on their curriculum because it's joined at the curriculum, so it's part of the curriculum. And I think we're something around over 80% of the community partners surveyed either use the recommendations from the students or plan to use the recommendations from the students after they did the work. So, and these are very early in their degree programs. They're just a year and a half into their degrees, so it's very early. They haven't done much applied modules at that stage. But we always say once you empower the students, it's fantastic what they can achieve. But that learning agreement that you mentioned, Lorraine, is a core part of the very start of the process in there, because that's a clear agreement between the community partner and the students of what they're going to fulfill.
Brilliant. And then Jamie, do you find that curriculum wise, you have a lot of contact time then with your students? Maybe is it every couple of weeks they come back into the classroom and touch base, or is it very much they work independently in small groups?
So I'm in School of Engineering here, and we would have a relatively heavy teaching load to do. This is a 5-credit module that they would do, and it's probably one of my most efficient modules. Now I'm not delivering it anymore, but it's probably one of the most efficient modules to deliver. Partly because there was a good bit of upfront time put in terms of engaging with community partners, kind of understanding them, setting up projects and so on, setting up all the paperwork in there, how it works in terms of the agreements, in terms of the assessment and so on. So how we run it is effectively the students go and we contact our community partners that we've worked with in the past and say, have you any other projects? We get the list of projects and the contacts and so on. We prepare a guidance document for the students, and in that as a whole list of projects, potential projects and partners and contact details and so on. But the students can come up with their own projects as well, and oftentimes they do with their different contexts they have or their own local community and so on. And then they have 2 weeks to do the learning agreement, as I said. And then after that, during that, we do drop-in clinics every week, and we do some workshops with them. But it's a self-directed project, drop-in clinics in there over the 8 weeks. And at the end of it, they make a technical report and do a presentation as well at the end of it, and they're assessed on all of that. There's a self-assessment form as well, so the students actually assess themselves. They work in groups and they assess themselves first, how well they think they've done against the learning outcomes or the expectations of the module, and then the grader or the academic marks that, and they get that sheet back so they can see how they've done relative to how the academic things they've done relative to what they have assessed themselves in.
You're a brave person. Self-assessment. Love it. And I also love the idea there of the guidance document for students with actual examples of previous work. And I'm going to share with everyone a folder with some of these documents. But how do people feel about giving students actual practical examples of the caliber that you want and what you're looking for, as kind of giving almost like a step up from the rubric, isn't it? It's a real hands-on example of what's expected as an outcome. Brilliant. And Jamie, thank you so much for your time. Just to share, one of your cohort a number of years ago worked with us on in Galway, there is a park called Terryland Forest Park. It's going for a designation called National City Park. It's a certain designation you need to work towards. And a group of Jamie's students worked on the civil engineering construction outline plan for outdoor classrooms in this space, so that primary, secondary schools, community groups could have a physical space in the park as a base, as an educational resource, and to bring the forest alive really to kind of the more formal educational sessions. And it's been launched. It's really been a huge success. It was a real fire for the community to get that report from the students. They were so excited about it. And off the back of that, other little things have happened. A particular cohort of migrant communities in Galway have actually adopted a piece of the park. And that's their piece that they volunteer with each week, and they can use the outdoor classroom as a base for the volunteers to keep their supplies. So there's just been lovely ripples from a lot of this work. So Jamie, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So
And
up on the links there, Lorraine, I've put the Campus Engage link
Yes.
already. If they haven't come across that, there's someone mentioned resources. There's loads of super resources there. Look, that was the key for me to give me confidence at the start, was the resources and getting examples from other people. So if anyone needs something, just ask me if I have it. I'm very happy to share it. But up on the Campus Engage, there's lots of great resources there. And then I just put a link to a paper that we had published last year, which kind of links the community engaged learning work that we've done to the SDGs and shows how the students' work has impacted on the Sustainable Development Goals.
Nice,
amazing.
thanks, Jamie.
And
Yeah,
I think there's also something there. What I really struck to me was also the connection to the student centered learning there, that they can think about, how this is a practical example that, if they're going into an interview, they have something to talk about that's quite unique and interesting to bring to that. And it's something that has that practical connection there too. And it's something.
The practical connection is like I've been in interviews with students, and they do. It's one of the things that they highlight, I suppose, but also it's that they feel a responsibility. So they're not just handing, the lecturer a report that might just get thrown in the bin. They actually feel a responsibility to their client or the community partner, and they're very proud of what they do, and they're hoping that it will be useful. So you actually get a lot higher quality from the students. There's a risk in there. Anyone in the University of Galway here that does this stuff, it's great, because the university actually value it so highly that they're willing to take the risk, because we're letting our students out loose into the community and advising community partners. But because it's so highly valued in the university, that risk is accepted. And we the underwriters of the university clear us every year to be able to do this work, which is absolutely fantastic, because it's embedded within the university strategy and the ethos of the university, which is great.
What a great practical tip. Make sure you're insured to do this work. I love it. Thank you, Jamie.
It's the pitfalls we're in.
I love how the engineer was like thinking of the insurance. I love it. Thank you, Jamie. That's brilliant. And speaking of letting them wild out into the community, our next speaker is Aidan, who is very much embedded within the community, and particularly with migrant communities, communities that are experiencing, I suppose, we don't use that term anymore, asylum, isn't that right, Aidan? We now say international protection applicants. And I was wondering if you could talk us through, Aidan, those who are here, participating in this short course, if they would like to work with migrant communities, what kinds of networks are available, within their own institution nationally, maybe through the University of Sanctuary, to work with migrant communities.
Yep. Hi, Lorraine. So thanks for having me, and hello to everybody. I'd like to premise this by saying that I've only had 2 hours sleep because I'm only coming back from a conference in Japan. So if I don't communicate properly, I leave you my email address to contact me afterwards. So apologies in advance. So yeah, like everybody else, I suppose, and every kind of ongoing initiative within the universities, is that how do people know we exist? Like, it just seems that getting the message out there that we exist is a huge problem. So, like, just a bit of context. So, as part of my service learning project, which I think it's great following on from Jamie, in 2017, when I was doing my master's in public advocacy and activism, a number of students set up the Default Refugee Society, if you remember, Lorraine, as part of that. And equally, we felt that we were reaching out to the student body, but that we weren't making an impact at national level or at management level, and we weren't really broadening access to the universities. So then a number of us came together to see how we could change things at the management level. So we discovered the Universities of Sanctuary Network. So the Places of Sanctuary Network is a registered charity in the UK and Ireland. So they're all across Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, and since 2015 here in the Republic. So if people do want to get involved, or a good first port of call would be that network, the Universities of Sanctuary, because all of the HEIs in Ireland are Universities of Sanctuary designated. And the new technical universities are undertaking to become Universities of Sanctuary. I think are more recent, and I can see our colleague Trish, or former colleague Trish, in earlier this year, the Technical University of the Shannon has become the most recent University of Sanctuary. So bravo. So that would be a first network. So even within your own universities, we have those, and reaching out to the networks within our university, you then have access to both, well, to both Ireland and the UK. So it's a really good network. Of course, I have to plug our own thing. But beyond that, national bodies, including the Irish Refugee Centre, NASC, the Migrant Rights Centre, MASI, most importantly, the Movement of Asylum Seeker in Ireland, they are indeed the international protection applicants for international protection applicants. So the most genuine advocacy group you can find in Ireland today on issues of international protection and migration. In an Irish context is indeed MASI. So I'd recommend anybody, if they have any issues or if they are going to construct any form of curricular-based activities, to reach out to MASI, because we're all experts by proxy as such, whereas lived experiences coupled with academic excellence, in that most of the members of MASI are academics, would be your best place to start, I guess.
And Aidan,
yeah.
you know, just on those wonderful networks that you're mentioning that are advocating, you know, am I correct in saying population-wise, you know, Ireland, we actually have a very small percentage of refugee or
Yeah, that's actually very true. Now, I think things have been skewed in the last 12 months since the war in Ukraine, because Ireland has welcomed 70,000 Ukrainian citizens to the country. And of course, the communication from the government isn't really great in this area, to say the least. So there seems to be a conflation between all of the refugees in Ireland, kind of with this war in Ukraine. So just for context, and I'll put it in as simply as possible without, thank you, Maria, without going into too much detail given our limited time, because you do almost need a degree to understand this. So people, when coming to Ireland, seek international protection. You are correct, Lorraine, in saying that we've moved away from the term asylum because it feels like it's a charity-based model. No, Ireland signed up to the International Convention on the Rights of the Refugee, and we have ratified that. So we have international obligations. Given Ireland's own past of forced migration across the globe, famine, we should be the most receptive country you would imagine in Europe to international protection applicants. However, when people come to Ireland seeking international protection, they arrive in the country, they claim international protection, and then they fill out a form for their claim to be assessed. This can take quite a long time. As we know, there are varying times from anywhere between 3 years up to 12 years. Reform in recent years has been piecemeal. I won't go into too much detail, but that's your standard international protection system. Then in recent years, we've had the refugee relocation program, which people will be more familiar with that in terms of Syria and Afghan refugees coming to Ireland as registered refugees from third countries, coming to Ireland, having the right to work, all of the things that all of the rights that Irish citizens are afforded. And they would be distinct, and they don't go into the direct provision system. And then more recently, this year, you have the European Temporary Protection Directive, and that is specifically for Ukrainian citizens coming to Ireland who have been afforded all of the rights of Irish citizens as well, arriving here. It gets easier the higher you go in this tier society or in this tier system, because upon arrival in Ireland, Ukrainians are like bank accounts, oh God, what are they called? Public cards, numbers, all of those, making their life and
Brilliant.
integration easier into Irish society, unlike those pre-existing within the system. So that triple tier system is existing within that already. So it's causing huge problems as such as in resources. So yes, what has assisted the far right in recent years has really been a lack of communication on the part of the government to highlight how, in fact, low numbers are for those seeking international protection in Ireland, those who were granted international protection in Ireland, and the high level, Ireland's amongst the countries in Europe with the highest rejection rate of international protection claims. So
Oh, wow.
there's huge disconnect between reality on the ground and what the far right are actually stating now, like Ireland for Ireland's own first. You know, there's such a simple message that they seem to get it out quite clearly, and communities need to respond to that, which I'll go into in a bit how we are responding, but locally here anyway.
Yeah, because I suppose there are networks across Ireland who, are ensuring a welcoming environment and really changing that narrative. And Galway Anti-Racism Network, I've just popped up their logo there, are particularly active. Are they part of a branch then nationwide? Aidan, there's other networks.
Yeah, they would be. There's a large network of the Irish Anti-Racism Network, and more recently, because everything evolves, we now have Communities Against Racism. So I will actually state, unfortunately, like that the Galway Anti-Racism Network, I am not here as a representative of the Galway Anti-Racism Network. Unfortunately, since I think the last 2 years, the Galway Anti-Racism Network hasn't really functioned in its advocacy role as it had done in the past. So in recent months, a number of organizations have come together to establish the Galway Communities Against Racism and Discrimination.
Nice. Okay.
Which is a collective organization between the Galway Traveller Movement, the Galway City Community Network, which is Galway's public participatory network, which represents 168 voluntary organizations, individuals from the international protection community, Irish travellers, and of course the university. We're going to be represented at that as well. So we're coming
together. I think your point there, Aidan, is that, and I suppose that's what's great about this short course series, is that we're really kind of empowering those that are participating, that there are going to be networks and supports in your local area that you can tap into, and not to necessarily be overwhelmed or scared about maybe, embracing these thematic areas, getting your students involved in them, maybe doing the groundwork together with your students and researching different networks and communities and projects together as part of this. Because I think that really when you start off a project, you're thinking, okay, well, who am I going to connect in with? And if there are changes happening within the community, that's fine. And really kind of having a bit of flexibility and adapting to the different cohorts that
exactly. And as you've heard from me there, like, I mean, things are evolving all of the time. I mean, I've just explained to you the triple tier system that didn't exist 10 years ago, like, like the Communities Against Racism, all of these things are ever evolving. And like that, educators within the university do have those resources there. It's just about knowing, like, and for me as well, what Jamie mentioned about the service learning element, like 8 students have participated with the University of Sanctuary Steering Committee. So we have a committee on the within the university that's made up of individuals from the international protection community, the Irish traveller community, local advocacy organizations, and of course university management and staff. So each of the vice deans EDI from the 4 colleges sit on that committee, and we feed in then to the EDICC. Sorry about all of the jargon, but that's just where we are within the university. So if anybody does want to initiate any projects with students, like, we're more than happy to act as signposters to any organizations, because absolutely, I mean, student activism is key to all of this. Students, like, student-led activism is one of the most fruitful, you can argue, of any forms of activism, because they have the time, the resources, the youth, the energy, and all of the above. So yeah, it's a good first step.
Thanks, Aidan. That's super. So I think we'll take it from there, really, to thank both Aidan and Jamie for kind of, again, empowering this group and providing their expertise and understanding so that this group can really feel excited to develop their modules with their students who want to explore issues in relation to migration and refuge. So thank you both so much. So we'll fly on with some more rich content that we have here in terms of designing. And Maria, I'm going to pass to you.
Yeah, sure.
On these.
Great. I'm just to kind of think about when you're looking at service learning or community-based learning design, is to think about the kind of these five steps. So, these are not hard and fast. And what, even when Jamie was looking at, developing, he used some kind of terminology. So, Lorraine, you're also welcome to kind of, jump in there. Some of this terminology is also that I'll be sharing is stuff that our colleagues on this Erasmus Plus project have designed for us. So we want to make sure that we're using all the kind of the terminology that is also relevant for the Irish context. So we're just going to forge ahead and look at those, those 5 steps that are probably not that unfamiliar, so you're looking at kind of preparing, kind of testing the waters plan, look at the implementation, looking at that monitor and assessment, and then we're looking at that final assessment piece and the reviewing that's going to happen. So forward ahead there, Lorraine. So if you want to, I think I'm missing 2 arrows on the, if you press it. Yeah, great. So when we're looking at that, of course, we want to think of balancing, in the curriculum, you want to balance the needs of the students along with the needs of or with the communities that you're looking to want to connect with. And in this case, if we're looking at migrant communities, then we have to think about how we're going to balance those in our preparation. So some of those steps in the early preparation stage is to think about, what are those educational objectives that you're thinking of for both learning and service at both the individual level. So that might be individual student level, but also on the individual level of individuals that are in the community and as collectively as both groups of students and groups in the community. And then looking at, identify who you're going to coordinate and collaborate with. And I think both Jamie and Aidan have kind of articulated this well. Who are the potential partners? Who can you look to? I kind of popped in a couple of resources there, but and if you look on the Irish Network Against Racism, they have a list of their members. So some of them might be more local to you if you're not in the Galway area, for example, that are there. So you can think about who you want to collaborate with. Maybe it's also established relationships that you already have with communities that you want to connect with. And then it's looking at some of those issues and, thinking about, what are those formal requirements that you need to do? And, as Jamie mentioned, universities in Ireland are very receptive, and the University of Galway in particular is very receptive to doing this and looking at, what are those, thinking about, what are the authorizations you might need? What maybe there are things like permits that are required, thinking about those ethical issues and thinking about things like insurance. And, that's part of the reason why we have the CKI in NUI Galway to help with in University of Galway to kind of navigate some of those issues. And again, Campus Engage also provides some of those resources available too. And then considering all that project organization, what is it going to look like? How are you going to do the scheduling, the timing? What kinds of resources and budgets might be needed? And maybe Lorraine, if you wanted to kind of jump in at any time to talk about, at what time of year that you might need to do, thinking about from a budget perspective and getting some key CKI support, or when that happens, feel free to kind of let people know, or maybe this is more on a rolling basis, but it allows people to have to think about that in their mind, how they would go about doing that. Great. So next, you're ahead there. So the next is really just to think about, we need to present thinking about all that preparation we've done, and now we need to the planning. And that's through the consensus with your project group. And that project group is, of course, taking both sides, looking at both, the students that are going to be engaged in the project and also the community and the migrant communities that you want to be working with. And it's really just exploring some of that early preparation work, but using that W5 model, who are we looking at working with, the what, where, when, how, and why, and make sure that there's a clarity and an understanding on both sides to understand how to do that. Looking at what are those responsibilities on those that are going to be involved in the project, and making sure that there's a clarity on both the values and the learning that's going to happen within this project, so that all groups have agreed to what's going to happen, so they understand, the project objectives, aims, and that this can be reflected on even before the project begins. That's hoping to minimize and to manage expectations. I think that's very important. Next one, Lorraine. So this is then about thinking about testing the waters, like starting that kind of implementation. And the reality is that you know, all those great intentions. It's like on any kind of group dynamics, right? You have all the you know, the warm and fuzzy stuff, and then there's all those kind of nice words at ending, you know, the storming, norming, all of those things that can happen when you're working with groups together. So one of the ways to kind of make sure that that can work well between both student and community groups is to think about having an orientation, having in situ days where people are, you know, spending time getting to know each other. The idea of ensuring that that this relationship has a lot of flexibility, acknowledging that there can be some changes to schedule that can happen, and then making sure that you know, what are those tools, and you know, how are things going to be monitored to ensure that things are progressing well, so that the relationships are being built in a particular way. And then we're thinking about the monitoring and assessment. So, you know, what ways, you know, how is this going to be done in a very holistic way so that everybody can be involved in how we're reflecting on the learning in the project, how we're reflecting on how the project is progressing, how the service outcomes are going to be assessed. And then I love this idea of, you know, keeping that door open. You know, is this something that has a life after the shelf life of the project? And, you know, could this be something that can continue? And if so, what would that look like? So having those conversations and exploring that. And then, of course, looking at the assessment feedback design that we can kind of highlight there. So I'll highlight that in a minute. That's why there's all those dots. But before I do that, let's think about the final assessment. So first, there's the academics. On the academic side, looking at the evaluation and reviewing the project from that perspective, and then the evaluation from all the project partners. So looking at, you know, thinking about, you know, what is the participants' interests and motivations for being involved in the project? You know, what's the experiential learning that's happened, and thinking about, you know, how is that group dynamics changed? You know, there's been, you know, a lot of conflict management that happened. Has there been leadership leaders that have emerged, and what kind of roles have emerged throughout this project experience? And then thinking about the evolution of both the moral climate of the group, the attitudes, the common values that maybe have occurred. So it's really just taking that kind of really macro view, but also taking a micro view on, you know, how is the project really, you know, achieved, and thinking about, you know, how can we change things to make things better, because that's of course what we want to be doing. So if we take, for example, if you want to, Lorraine, go to the next slide, there are some examples here of, you know, community feedback, how the community CKI offers some kind of feedback. So there are some ways of having these. I don't know if you want to, these are some of the examples. Lorraine, do you want to kind of talk through them?
We can put the link to all these documents in our email to everyone, so you can use this Word document for your own service learning courses. So this example is from a module that we do with second year biomedical science students, and each student has this document that they present to their community partner, who will complete it and send it back directly to the academic, so that they have it as a, you know, a form of the final assessment. So it gives the academic an you know, direct line to what the community partner feels in relation to how the student really got on within the project. Some other examples that we'll give you are reflection essays. So you might want your students to complete reflections papers. And if they, you know, maybe do 2 or 3 reflection pieces throughout the whole semester, you're going to get some feedback and some updates as to how the project is going along. And I feel that works really well, because I found in some of the modules that I've been involved in, I unfortunately found out maybe too late in the semester if a project wasn't succeeding for a student with their community partner. So you want to try and get, I suppose, that intervention as soon as, you know, week 4, week 5. If they haven't met their community partner by then, you know, alarm bells need to go off, and you need to, I suppose, have that intervention there with the student. So for this particular module, we do 3 reflection essays. One focuses on academic, the other on personal, and the last on civic skills. So as a form of assessment, the students do 3 parts. So as you can see here, it's broken down into what. So what have they been involved in relation to their civic engagement experience? The so what, so the interpretation of that, and the now what, the outcome. So by scaffolding the reflection essay, the student knows exactly what's expected of them for this assessment. So might be something that you want to consider. This is another little great tool, again, courtesy of Financial Justice Ireland. Thank you to them. Maybe as Jamie mentioned for his module, they have these open clinics. So students popping along and you doing the 5-finger feedback. So getting students to sit down and chat maybe in a buddy or a pair or a triad with 3 other students and sharing their 5 pieces, you know, what they're getting out of their community partnership project, what's not working so well, what's they're getting a little bit of a challenge on or a pushback on and they need support with. So they need more input, and what's something that's working really well. So by kind of giving them the tool to summarize where they're at stages along through the service learning module, you as the academic, you're getting some instantaneous feedback, and the student as well is getting to maybe get a sense of how's everybody else doing with their projects, where am I at, and maybe that little self-assessment is happening. Another assessment we've done in this module with Professor Derek Morris in biomedical sciences, the students do a presentation. Now they actually end up doing 2 formal presentations, one at the very start of the semester, just after meeting their community partner, where they have to present their outline, so what they're going to do, and then they give a presentation at the very end of the semester in terms of how their community partnership progressed and the achievements and the end result. So it gives an update, which is really important to presentation. And they also need to create, as part of their community partnership in this module, an intervention, and then measure the outcome of that intervention. So they, I suppose, need to present how they're going to do a pre-study and a post-study. So they might do a pre-survey and a post-survey, or they might have some interview questions at the start and some interview questions at the end. So nice mixed method approach. So again, I'll provide this document, but you might consider it helpful to give, again, a really scaffold tool to your students that says, this is what I want in a presentation. I want 10 slides, and this is what I want in the 10 slides. And that way, again, they're really, I suppose, meeting the expectations that you have for whether it's 15 ECTs, 5, 10 ECT module. Another example, and Jamie mentioned it for his module as well, is that your student might produce a final report. Again, we can provide this example. We give an example to students of what the final report should look like. So we give them previous year's examples, and we give them a very much scaffold, a clear outline as to what should be included in their final report. So that's a little bit on the service learning, and I suppose we're going to, if people have questions, please pop them in the chat.
There is one there, Lorraine, actually.
Yeah.
So there's just there's a comment there from David around compensating people and vendors and getting, and how that can not be straightforward sometimes. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. Well, it's
something
there,
that we've
hot
talked
off the
about,
press.
because it's really changed a lot recently. But we do feel that if community groups are giving their time, so for example, next week for our final session, we have GoCom, Migrant Community Radio, who are going to be spending the 45-minute session with us. So we're going to create an invoice and ensure that they get paid for their expertise and their time, especially this cohort, right? Migrant communities, refuge communities, we need to ensure that their time is honoured, and finding partners that maybe have that position where they can invoice the universities that you work with, it might be a way to do it. Go for it, Chris.
Yes.
Okay. So this may be a bit, well, first of all, I may have zoned out slightly and missed whether there was a specific application form for the funding from CKI, or do I just ask you very nicely?
So yeah, basically a lovely email, and what we've I suppose popped into the last email we sent you was kind of a little outline. So you might want to include details on the module, when you're hoping to run it, who your partners might be, maybe a rough idea budget, what you're thinking you'd like to. But as David has pointed out, if you're bringing in a community partner, we can certainly make sure that we can fund them for their time towards our module.
Great.
Chris.
The
Go
other
crazy.
thing
We have a
The other
great
thing,
budget.
this is probably a larger conversation to have with you another time, but um, we're just starting. We've just shifted from a 3-year to a 4-year degree
Nice.
in psychology. So now we have a 3rd year of which I'm the coordinator. That's kind of new and is kind of our transition year in a way. Because in the first semester it's mainly electives, and in the second semester there's a work placement. But it's
Nice.
likely that most of those placements are going to be in NGOs. Hopefully anyway. There might be some schools as well, but and well, or students don't really have, I mean, because psychology is so individualistic, and they don't really have a lot of skills in thinking about NGOs and contexts and stuff like this. So I will have, one of the electives is going to be community psychology and social justice module that I'm going to
Nice.
be teaching. But I'm thinking of that maybe it would be nice to transition towards that being actually a core module in the first semester of that year, that kind of slots into the preparation for them going on
Brilliant.
placement.
Yeah, that sounds good. And that's like what we heard last week, wasn't it, from our colleagues in Italian, how they did a pre-module, right, to
Yeah,
prep
exactly.
the
Yeah.
students. Yeah.
So this is all context for my question about how much interaction is there between CKI and the Career Development Center, because it's the Career Development Center who are
Yes.
supporting our work placements.
Yes, it's a great question. And I suppose there's a different mindset. We talked about this, Maria, didn't we? That a placement is quite different from a service learning module. So I suppose what we would consider a service learning module has a thick richness of the curriculum stitched into the time spent with community. So if I'm doing a project with migrants, I might be back in the classroom next week with a reading that my academic has assigned, discussing that with my peers, and then being able to pull in, well, what actually I just saw in practice was this. Now we're reading this, and I'm having discussion with you on this, and here's how I'm processing that, right? Whereas placement, my understanding is they're very much gone off-site, and career themselves might check on them once, but that's about it. And there isn't a stitch into the curriculum piece. So I think if you were planning, as Marie has outlined there, you would look at your reading list really and think about, is it a placement approach that I want, or is it a service learning approach? Or do I want that pre-module that might be service learning, where they do some time building up that relationship with the organization with some guided readings and that assessment piece, so that they're maybe academically set up to think about their skills in practice. And it, it could be for you as psychology students in particular about building their research skills, and that's what the curriculum pieces. So they come back into class and they talk about narrative interviews as a tool, and how would that work with migrant groups, and so there's so many different angles that we could. That's a great opportunity, Chris. So really excited to talk to you about that, and thank you for knowing that you need to prep your students for working with vulnerable people.
Thanks for providing this opportunity to learn more about this as well. And I like that last model that you suggested of the kind of or making, at the moment this module isn't a service learning module, but if we were to morph it into one, that would prepare them for then being quite independent in the work placement.
Yeah, and I suppose what's great about it is that that there's a body of literature behind you that can support this type of pedagogy. And Sarah Clancy is going to join us next week. She's a community worker in County Clare.
Oh yeah, I know Sarah. That's great.
She's an incredible person. But again, it's moving beyond bringing in someone like Sarah as a speaker, right? We're talking about co-creating here. So she says migration is not a crisis, it's a feature of all human existence, and in this century it may increase, and we have to get it right. No human is illegal. I mean, this is so powerful, right? That any of us have a say about who belongs or who should be in our community is something that with our students we have the opportunity now to potentially support them to transition from. our time is up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave these here and say to you, last week we talked about the origins of migration and refuge being debt, tax and trade. So I have content here that you might need for you to unpack this with your students. If you want to explore with your students, why are there migrants? Why are there refugees? Well, in Ireland, we are a tax haven. We allow and facilitate international corporate tax to be funneled from the global south to the global north. We do not benefit from it as a nation. You and I as an individual do not receive this corporate tax that is funneled through a PO box in Dublin, but yet we are creating poverty in parts of the world. There's lots of material here on trade. You know, if you're a community in an area and you want to develop your raw material, the cocoa bean, and you want to create that more sophisticated product, the chocolate, which you can get a bigger return for financially, if you go to export that, you are hit with tariffs, quotas, import duties. It makes it financially, you know, impossible for you to get on that ladder and to increase those profits for you, for your community. And we as a European, you know, country, what we have done with subsidies, for example, really has a knock-on effect. And then we will see that impact then in terms of refuge and migration. If people want to follow No White Saviors on Instagram, it's incredible. It's a great teaching tool. Use it in your class, get your students looking at them, you know. Colonialism was not that far away, and we might not have boots on the ground in countries, but instead of boots on the ground, we have other things like the trade, tax, debt on the ground. And Michael D has recently spoken about climate change. Again, a great documentary on Al Jazeera. If anyone wants to show it for their class, highly recommend it. I've some great videos here on reverse racism as well. It does not exist, it's not real. Just to highlight this comedian on the far right has a fantastic video on reverse racism where he summarizes why it doesn't exist. And I played this for a group of students once in class, and I had a student say and share that, you know, a comedian is using comedy to bring a difficult issue to the fore, but for they themselves, their skin is what this comedian is talking about. And for them, they can't laugh. And I just felt that in that moment, that student was able to feel like they had a safe space within our classroom to share how she reacted to this video content. And so I was, you know, I was glad that we had time in the class to process that for all of the students. And I suppose that's one of the things as well, that when you're doing this type of work with your students, that you buffer the time for them to process some of this content, because they are living, this is their lived reality. This is an activity I do with students. Sometimes the leaves are the symptoms and the roots are the root issues, the root causes. So that's why we talk about why there is migration or why there's, you know, refuge. So getting to the root issue is so important. So well done. You're 3/4 of the way through. It's a whistle-stop tour every week, but we really appreciate you hanging on in with us. And thank you so much for your attention. And next week we have our community partner, member of the GoCom Community Migrant Radio.